Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sitara Akram. I'm very excited about starting my YouTube channel today. I've recently finished my doctorate in Islamic finance from the University of Leeds, and before that, many years ago, I had completed my MBA from the Institute of Business Administration, Karachi, and have lots of work experience as a senior manager. I have put a short link in the bio to this channel, but just wanted to say very briefly that in the last 15 years, I've done a lot of learning around Islamic law, Islamic legal theory, and of course, with my doctorate, I've had to delve into quite a lot of depth when thinking about the definition of usury in the Quran. And I just felt that now is the right time for me to be sharing some of that learning with a wider audience. And hence this channel. So I'm just recording this short introductory video just to give you a sense of what this channel is about, what my approach is like, and what the key content and themes I would be covering in a series of videos over the next months and hopefully years, depending on how this goes. If we see Islamic law and how if we look at how we're interacting with Islamic law at the moment, whether that's at national level, we have theocracies like Saudi Arabia and Iran, where Islamic law and its implementation has taken a particular approach. Some would say quite a authoritarian approach, which has resulted in human rights abuses, quite strict definitions of dress codes, and those have had huge implications for society. And you have examples like Pakistan, which identifies itself as an Islamic republic and has introduced the hudud ordinances, or some laws which are inspired from the Quran. And again, the implementation of these has been critiqued heavily in terms of whether they're ensuring the spirit of justice or not. We do know that young Muslims are finding it quite difficult to relate to the traditional approach to substantive lawmaking and legal discussions. Generally, they take the form of fatwas or non-binding legal opinions, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of receptivity towards them, or young people thinking that they are relevant to them. I mean, it's really interesting. I teach a group of young girls, very informal. They're my friends' daughters. And they are young teenagers. And the first question they asked me was, Sitara auntie, can you tell us about all the rules for Muslim women? And why does the Sharia have so many rules for Muslim women? So it's interesting then to hear from young people, young women, particularly young girls, who are so worried about whether they are meeting all the rules and regulations that God has set for them. And the question that begs the question, has God set up so many rules and regulations for Muslim women? In a global context, we're also currently in a major crisis, an existential crisis due to climate change, and Muslim societies, Muslim countries in particular, are affected by it. We have very little capital, economic capital, technological capital to be able to deal with that. A lot of Muslim countries are actually economically poor or underdeveloped. And these are all major concerns. And the question then is, does the Quran guide us? How can the Quran and how can the vast tradition of Islamic knowledge, which is so rich and impressive, can it inspire us today to deal with some of these major issues which we're confronting as a community? It's not all doom and gloom. I mean, what is absolutely fascinating is if you spend time picking up Islamic scholarly debates, you find that it's a very vibrant, very rich, very dynamic space. And particularly reformist scholars in the last, I would say, 30, 40, maybe about 60 years have just done an impressive amount of work trying to engage with the challenges that modernity has shown up in society, and how society deals with those challenges, and how society itself is being reconfigured through quite a West-centric view of the world, and a very hegemonic kind of Western influence, cultural influence on the world as well. And how do different societies accommodate themselves in that, and how do different societies deal with that? I mean, Pankaj Mishra, who is an incredible commentator on this, has written a book a few years ago, I think 6 or 7 years ago, called The Age of Anger. I mean, this is how he defines our current I suppose the zeitgeist is that society feels it's angry. How do people find room for themselves in what has become more and more a monocultural way of living. And a very and of course the pressures that capitalism is creating, particularly on young people who are thinking about what their life chances are going to be like in this extremely difficult economic situation where there are huge amounts of wealth inequality. So these are the kind of things that I think about when I do have some spare time, which I do have a lot of at the moment because my sons have started university. So I do have an empty nest and some spare time on my hands in the evening after I return from work. Hence this channel to help me keep busy as well. I think it is important for me just to very briefly say a little bit about my journey and my positionality. So I have been studying, I would say quite informally, different scholars over the last 15 odd years. And I'm very lucky my husband's also interested in very similar debates. So he and I learn a lot from each other. And any sources of knowledge that I come across or he comes across, we tend to share them. So it's kind of doubling up of that learning. And then I've spent the last 8 years working on a PhD. And in that time frame, I've done a lot of dialogic learning, primarily through social media, because I have been writing very actively on social media, more recently on a private Facebook group. And one of the advantages of dialogic learning is that it makes you pause, because there is very active, dynamic engagement with what you're putting out in the public domain. There is somebody questioning you, critiquing you, disagreeing with you. And what it means in effect, that it forces you to go back to your books, to rethink, to self-reflect, to look at new evidence. So there is a brilliant process of learning that continues throughout as you engage in dialogue. But it's also incredibly time consuming, and it does take a lot of energy. And I just felt that now is the time for me to step away a little bit from dialogic learning and actually start to consolidate some of the knowledge and thinking that I've accumulated in the last, I would say, couple of decades, and share that more widely with an audience, with the hope that it can influence some people and especially encourage Muslim women to exercise their agency as believers and bring their perspectives to the table, which are something I value so much. And there are some amazing, inspiring Muslim women around me who are doing that work. In terms of positionality, I am a student of Islam. I don't make claims to any scholarly status. My fascination is with usul al-fiqh, or what we call Islamic jurisprudence, also called Islamic legal theory. And Islamic legal theory has its own approach to knowledge creation and to interpretation of the canonical sources of Islam. This is an area I find absolutely fascinating, and it's incredibly impressive. For me, the process of knowledge seeking has no endpoint. I do think of knowledge seeking as walking a path, as putting one foot in front of another, continuously walking down that path. I cannot guarantee that the endpoints or conclusions of my knowledge are always sound, or that there is always objective truth in them. So really, in that sense, I adopt the position of classical scholars, who put the absolute emphasis on the process and honesty of endeavor. So when I'm approaching knowledge, I'm trying to be honest and open-minded in my knowledge seeking, and then see where the evidence leads me. And I've tried to use exactly the same approach in my PhD thesis as well, where I've reopened the question of riba or usury, which is prohibited by the Quran. I do value criticality. When new evidence comes to light, I change my opinion, which is sometimes seen as a negative as well, because I think, particularly in our more traditional circles and traditional discourses, there is this idea that a scholar should just be able to come up with a definitive black and white opinion. And sometimes we find that there is a lot of grey, and sometimes our opinion changes because the evidence changes. So I am open to all of those changes. I take very seriously the Quran's reflection to ponder, the Quran's invitation to ponder, to reflect on it, and to reflect on it in an open-minded way. So the reflection should change me as a person, and the sharing of those reflections should change us as a community. So I take that invitation from the Quran very, very seriously. So you will find that the idea of using reason, using rationality or aql will come up as a constant theme in all of my videos. I uphold the truth of the Quran and Sunnah. I'm an insider to the Muslim tradition. I'm a Muslim myself. I'm from Pakistan. I've migrated to the UK. So both those cultural contexts will come up again and again in my discussions and thoughts that I share in these videos. I'm a woman. Liberatory readings of the Quran are important to me. I do feel that, and I think historical evidence also demonstrates that the Islamic knowledge tradition is overwhelmingly male-centric. The interpretive communities tend to be almost exclusively male. I think recently Muslim women have started to make some inroads, but they have not been received with the same level of credibility, and the same level of competence has not been assigned to their thoughts and views. Often religious spaces also tend to be overwhelmingly male. I mean, we see that in the mosque situation, the kind of the mosque spaces in the UK, which are not very welcoming to women. So it's very important for me to have female voices and female representations and female perspectives on the canonical sources of Islam. Because I think that by bringing those female perspectives, we will enrich our knowledge tradition, we'll make it more egalitarian, we'll make it more just. And again, you'll see these themes recurring in my videos, and by opening this channel I'm doing the same. I'm trying to enter a space and I'm trying to bring a female voice to what can often overwhelmingly be a male space. I believe in the ontological equality of men and women. In the Quran, in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 35, Allah tells us that He values the beliefs and good deeds of both Muslim men and Muslim women. And for me, that verse establishes their ontological equality. And so when I talk about men and women, Muslim men and women, I'm hugely respectful of the fact that men and women complement each other and they should work together to create a better society rather than be antagonistic to each other, which does mean that we have to give the same level of respect to each other as well, and to each other's opinions, including in matters of religion. I also want to claim the right to make mistakes. As I said earlier, in an overwhelmingly male interpretive community, many mistakes have been made in the last 1,000 years. And if women are entering interpretive communities now, they should also be allowed to be making mistakes. Women can also make mistakes whilst they engage with the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So they should be accorded that same flexibility and acceptance as has been given to male interpreters. And for that reason, I claim the right to make mistakes as I engage as a believer with God's teachings. For me, belief is pointless if it doesn't influence practice. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, in verse 8, there is a very beautiful an excerpt of that verse, which says, "Be just, that is next to piety." And it's a verse that I will ponder on in another video when I talk about orthodoxy and orthopraxy. For me, right belief and right conduct are both equally important, and right belief should be translating into right conduct, and right conduct should be strengthening right belief. This is how I view the teachings of Islam. And it's, I think we do have a divorce in this matter. I think we sometimes uphold orthodoxy to the extent that it's detrimental to the Muslim community. And I want to challenge some of those fatwas and legal opinions that do that. I'm somebody who's upset about the indignities of poverty and displacement that Muslims are facing at the moment, the Islamophobia that we face. And I'm also very upset about the fact that often Muslim women are oppressed by fellow Muslim men. And it's something that needs to change in our society. So I have the approach I have here is an empowering approach. I don't believe in victim narratives. I don't want to pin all the blame on colonialism and what it did to us, or white supremacy and what that's doing to the rest of the world. Yes, those things are important, but I feel that as Muslims, we need to put our own house in order first. And if we're going to do that, we don't just need to do problem identification, but also make suggestions for improvement, provide some solutions. So I have what Ibrahim Musa would say, a constructivist agenda. I want to reconstruct, I want to bring fresh interpretations. And that's what I've done in my PhD thesis, is I've not just critiqued the status quo, I have provided an alternative. And you'll see my approach carrying across kind of this care for the community and being an administrator in my day job, thinking about how we can translate values and principles into something implementable, into something that can actually create meaningful change on the ground and positively affect the lived experiences and the lives of Muslims. So as I'm sure you've gleaned by now, the main content and themes of my videos on this channel will be around Islamic fiqh, the tradition of knowledge, the challenges of modernity, how our sensibilities, moral sensibilities have changed over a period of time, and how that shapes how we approach divine law, what it means to be human, how to raise children living in Islamic societies or living in the diaspora, and I will be highlighting a lot of female voices who are working within the wider domain of Islamic studies. In doing so, I will aim to demystify and make accessible the knowledge tradition of Islam. I think, unfortunately, sometimes Arabic terms are weaponized. Sometimes Hadith traditions are weaponized to try to quash dissent, to silence some voices. And I think that that's intellectually dishonest. So whilst I will use terminology, I will try my very best to explain it and try to make it as accessible as possible. Because as somebody who believes in creating empowering spaces, I want these videos to also be empowering spaces, and for listeners to feel confident when they approach these conversations within their circle of family and friends, or their mosque or the wider community, and to be able to present their views with confidence and not feel intimidated in the face of weaponization of language, which I think unfortunately happens quite a lot. And really, in the end, I'm going to say, please do encourage and support my endeavor to share my learning and bring a female Muslim's voice to key debates of our times. And you can do that by subscribing to my channel, by listening to me, by sharing the videos, and of course through your engagement in comments. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm really looking forward to embarking on this journey. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.